Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this morning we'll be doing another sutta study. This one will be on the Chaitanya Karaniya Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 11, sutta number 2. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start going through the sutta. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So the sutta is Anguttara Nikaya 11.2, the Chaitanya Karaniya Sutta. So as usual, I'll be going through it in Pali and giving some explanations as we go along. And I'll take any questions at the end. So you're always welcome to put in questions and I'll answer them once I've gone through the discourse. So the title of the sutta, Chaitanya Karaniya. Chaitanya means intention or volition. It's actually from the same root as the word chitta, by the way. So a very literal translation of Chaitanya is simply thinking. But the usage of it in the sutta seems to indicate that this means one's intention, the purpose that one has in mind, or a goal, an aspiration of mind. And the word karaniya, it's from the root kar, from which we get the word karma. So karma meaning action. It's also where we get the verb karoti, which means to do something or to make something. And karaniya is the future passive participle form. So this indicates what can be done or ought to be done. So the Chaitanya Karaniya, this means what can be done, should be done, may be done, ought to be done. So what is it, what kind of intention should we be making in our mind? Or what kind of intention do we need to make in the mind? So karaniya can also indicate what needs to be done. So a duty or a requirement. So the sutta begins, the Buddha says, Silavato bhikkhave sila sampannasa na chaitanaya karaniyam. Avipatisaro me upajjatu. So it starts here, the Buddha is talking to the monks. And minor side point here, so in the suttas, the default inclusive plural is the masculine form. So when, this is very familiar to anyone who's used to Latin-based languages, so Italian, Spanish, and other Latin-based languages, whenever you're referring to a group of mixed gender, you always default to the masculine plural. So it's the same in Pali. So although it says here bhikkhave, so speaking to a group of monks, that doesn't mean he was only speaking to male people. So his audience could include both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and he would still use the same form, bhikkhave. So just keep that in mind. So those who are not used to the gender-inclusive masculine plural sometimes misinterpret this to think it's only referring to male monks. But it's both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. So the Buddha says, Silavato sila sampannasa. So for one who has sila, for one who has perfected their sila, na chaitanaya karaniya, it is not necessary to produce the intention or the volition. Avipatisaro me upajjatu. So vipatisara means remorse or regret. So avipatisaro means non-remorse, non-regret. So mind which is free of regrets. and upajatu, may it arise. So avipatisaro me upajatu means may I have non-regret. May there be no regret in me. May I have no remorse. So the Buddha is saying when you have really good virtue, really good morality, really good sila, then it's not necessary to wish, may my mind be free of remorse. May I have no regret. Instead, the Buddha says, Dhammata esa yang silavato sila sampanasa avipatisaro upajati. So Dhammata means it's natural. It's the way things are. It's the Dhamma of things. They're the truth of things. So the Buddha is saying it's the natural truth. It's just the way it is, that someone whose morality is really good will not have any remorse. Their mind will be free of regret and remorse. And if you think about this, it's quite easy to understand this. If one is deeply committed to morality, deeply committed to being a really good person, deeply committed to always trying to do the right thing, so doing what is kind, what is gentle, what is compassionate, what is wholesome, what is beneficial, then you will rarely do anything wrong. If you do something wrong, it's an accident, and you know that it wasn't your intention to harm anything. And even your memories of having done unwholesome things in the past, you recognize as not being relevant to you in the present. So for example, I have distant memories of not so good things I did as a teenager, but that was a very long time ago and I'm a very different person now. So I don't have any regrets in my mind about the things I did as a teenager because that's not a reflection of who I am now. So in the same way, when one's morality is very strong and one is thoroughly committed to that strong morality, then one's mind will naturally be free of regret. You won't have regret and remorse appearing in the mind. And next the Buddha says, Avipatisarisa bhikkhave na chetanaya karaniyang pamojang me upajatuti. So he says, for one who is free of regret, there's no need to form the wish, may I be glad, may I be happy. So the word pamoja, this is a word which means happiness or gladness. So again, it's natural. The Buddha says Dhammata. So this is natural. It's normal. And it's to be expected that one who has no regret will be happy. So again, this is something which is not surprising. So what's one of the major forms of internal torment? It's when we're thinking about the bad things that we've done in the past, the bad things we're continuing to do in the present. This is something which torments the mind. It burns the mind from the inside out. And there can also be the fear of consequences, fear of what will happen when our unwholesome choices eventually catch up to us. So that also torments the mind. It makes it difficult to be happy and peaceful. But when we are committed to doing good things and we make a strong effort to always do wholesome things, beneficial things, then we have nothing to fear from the present and we have nothing to fear from the future. We know we're only creating the causes for goodness to come to us. So that's the condition for happiness. The mind can be very happy and peaceful when it knows that only good things are coming to it. And even when our bad choices from the past catch up to us, it doesn't have a strong effect on the mind because we know that now in this moment, our mind is pure, and that whatever lingering results from our past bad karma are affecting us now will fade away. It will be temporary because we're not creating any more bad karma. So once our old bad karma runs out, that will be the end of it. And as long as we continue producing good karma, then we'll be okay. So the mind can remain happy even when we're experiencing the negative consequences of our pre-morality choices. And next the Buddha says, Pamuditasa na chetanaya karaniyang piti me upajatu. So he says, for one who is happy, it is not necessary to wish, may euphoria arise in me. May I have euphoria. And of course he says, Dhammata esa yang pamuditasa piti upajjati. So it's natural, it's normal that somebody who is happy will, euphoria will appear, euphoria will arise. So piti, this word piti, which I'm translating here as euphoria, this is one of these very important elements of our, especially our meditation practice. It's also one of the 7 factors of awakening, but particularly where it becomes relevant is when someone is trying to develop samadhi, as you'll see as we get a bit farther into this discourse. So piti is this powerful euphoria, this very intense, pleasurable feeling that appears in the body, and that can saturate the whole body. So from head to toe, your whole body feels very pleasant, very good. So a sense of euphoria. And when there's this euphoria in the body, then the mind is much more easily able to settle down and focus on the body, to focus on one's physical experience, which again is a necessary component of samadhi. Piti also is one of the characteristics of first and second jhana. So again, if one is trying to cultivate good samadhi, then deliberately cultivating and bringing up piti, euphoria, is something which helps to accelerate the mind towards jhana, towards strong samadhi. And the next one, the Buddha says, Piti manasa bhikkhave na caitanaya karaniyang kayo me pasambatuti. Dhammata esa bhikkhave yang piti manasa kayo pasambati. So one who has euphoria does not need to wish, may my body be peaceful, may my body be tranquil. But rather it's natural that when one has euphoria, that one's body is tranquil. So again, when one is, first off, you have gladness, pamoja, and you have euphoria, so your body feels really good. The mind is very happy and euphoric, and there's no pain. The body feels very pleasant. Then naturally you just want to sit there, and there's no worries in your mind. There's no agitation in the body. There's no need to go anywhere or do anything. So you can just relax and let the body become completely still. And in fact, the more still you are, the more easily one can focus on the body, and therefore the more pleasurable it becomes, the more intense the happiness and euphoria becomes. Again, this is why it forms a natural precursor to samadhi practice. And the Buddha says, Pasadikaya sabhikavena caitanaya karaniyang sukhang vediyamiti. Dhammata esa bhikkhave yang pasadikayo sukhang vediyati. It says, so for one whose body is tranquil, there is no need to form the wish, may I feel pleasure, sukha, may I feel pleasure. Yeah, but rather he says it's natural that one whose body is tranquil will feel pleasure. So these 4 qualities here, so we have pamoja, so this happiness or gladness of mind, piti, so this euphoria, which is, again, this very pleasant perception of the whole body, kayo me pasamati, so tranquility of body, so the body being very still, very peaceful, very settled, no agitation, no restlessness, so the body is serene. And sukha, so the sense of pleasure. So sukha is also often translated as happiness. And in fact, the distinction between pamoja and sukha is relatively minor. Pamoja has more the sense of happiness, whereas sukha has more the sense of pleasure. But actually, there's a lot of overlap between these 2 words. But all of this together then is the conditions for samadhi. So all of that combined with strong mindfulness, strong sati, naturally results in very strong samadhi, which is naturally the next thing that the Buddha says. He says, Sukhino bhikkhave na caitanaya karaniyang chittang me samadhiyatuti. Dhammata esa bhikkhave yang sukhino chittang samadhiyati. So he says, when one is happy, when one is in this state of serene, tranquil pleasure, it's not necessary to wish, may my mind enter samadhi. So again, samadhi is the unification of mind, the collectedness of mind. We commonly translate it as concentration. But the literal meaning of samadhi is unification, collecting together, holding together. So may my mind gather together, may my mind unify, may my mind be collected, may my mind have samadhi. So again, when one is in this state of happy, serene pleasure, then the mind naturally enters samadhi. And this also is a very important point. So every now and then when people start to get into Buddhist meditation, sometimes there's this idea that meditation is this horrible, painful struggle. And at some point in the distant future, after you struggle your way along, then poof, you'll attain awakening. But actually, the way the Buddha describes practice is one of a happy, pleasant, peaceful, joyful mind, a euphoric experience, which this euphoria naturally creates the conditions for a stable and wise mind. So Buddhist meditation does not need to feel like crawling through broken glass. It can actually be a very pleasant and euphoric experience. And in fact, that's usually how the Buddha describes it. So elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha talks about four ways to practice. So there's the practice which is pleasant and fast. There's the practice which is pleasant and slow. There's the practice which is unpleasant and fast, and the practice which is unpleasant and slow. And interestingly enough, all four of these practices result in awakening. So why would you pick the painful ones? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Why don't we go with the pleasant ones? And again, it's actually much, much easier to attain samadhi when you go the pleasant route. And samadhi is extremely important. As we see the next line, the Buddha says, Samahi tassa bhikkhave na chaitanaya karaniyang yathabhutang janami pasamiti. Dhammata esa bhikkhave yang samahito yathabhutang janati pasati. He says, monks, for one who has samadhi, it is not necessary to wish, may I know and see things as they really are. May I know and see things accurately. But rather it's normal for one who has samadhi to know and see things as they are, to know and see things accurately. Now, it is important, by the way, to take this line in the context of the rest of the suttas. This actually is a general rule with any sutta. So any sutta can only be understood within the context of all of the other suttas. So as with any text, if you take a particular line of a sutta out of context, then you can twist it to mean pretty much whatever you want it to mean. But if you want to understand the actual intent behind any of the Buddhist statements, they need to be understood within the context of the entire Pali Canon. So an example of this is there's a line in the Dhammapada where the Buddha says, one who understands food can attain awakening. So you might read that line and you're like, oh, I guess I need to understand food. I better start going to all the fancy restaurants in New York City and make sure I understand all the food through direct experience. And of course, that's not going to lead to awakening. It's just going to lead to obesity and possibly rebirth as an animal. So clearly, that's not what the Buddha was talking about when he says one who understands food. But rather, he's referring to something else. And if you read through the rest of the suttas, then you'll understand what the Buddha means by that statement. So similarly here, the Buddha says one whose mind is in samadhi doesn't need to wish, may I know and see things as they are, but rather it's natural. But many other places in the suttas, the Buddha does clearly state that if one practices samadhi but does not practice insight, does not deliberately cultivate wisdom, then one will not attain awakening. Rather, one will simply be reborn in a heaven world. One will have a pleasant rebirth, so one is producing good karma, but one will not necessarily automatically develop wisdom. And in fact, different forms of concentration meditation can be found in many non-Buddhist traditions. So they're not necessarily a complete path to awakening. And in fact, what distinguishes Buddhism from other meditation traditions are the concepts of anicca, dukkha, anatta. The concept that everything is impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. Absolutely everything is impersonal. Not me, not mine, not myself. So when the mind is stabilized, focused, and alert, then it's possible to clearly know and see that everything is anicca, dukkha, anatta, that everything is impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. But it's also possible, when the mind is in samadhi, to just hang out and enjoy the bliss until your meditation is over. And actually, you can spend your entire life just blissing out in samadhi and not get one step closer to awakening. So it depends upon what you do with that skill. So, for example, somebody could spend years learning the Pali language and then spend the rest of their life writing Pali poetry about flowers and trees and never actually read any of the suttas. Or somebody could spend a couple years learning Pali and then spend the rest of their life studying the Pali suttas and learning thoroughly what the Buddha was talking about. So the preliminary step is the same, but it's what you do with that skill once you've developed it that makes the difference. So similarly, samadhi is a skill which is necessary for the development of wisdom. But if you don't use it for wisdom, then it's not going to lead to awakening. So samadhi by itself does not lead to awakening. There must also be the development of wisdom. So inclining the mind towards anicca, dukkha, anatta. And in the suttas, the Buddha makes it clear that actually anicca alone is sufficient. If you direct the mind to anicca, then the mind will naturally eventually come to realize dukkha and anatta as well. So cultivate samadhi and recognize the impermanence of all things. So anicca sanya, and the mind can attain awakening. But samadhi alone is not sufficient. And then the Buddha says, yatha bhutang bhikkhave janato pasato na chetanaya karniyang nibbindami iti. Dhammata esa bhikkhave yang yatha bhutang janang pasang nibbindati. So he says, monks, one who knows and sees things as they are does not need to form the wish, may I be disenchanted. But rather it's natural, it's normal. The one who knows and sees things as they are will become disenchanted. So the Pali word here, nibbindati, so it comes from the verb root vindati. So the verb vindati means to seek for something. So looking for something. And the prefix ner means down, to put something down or to stop doing something. So nibbindati means that we stop seeking. So we stop seeking for happiness where it can't be found. We stop seeking for meaning where it can't be found. So one becomes disenchanted with the things of the world because one recognizes that you cannot find genuine, true happiness in the things of the world. So no matter how much money you get, you still won't be happy. No matter who you marry, you won't be happy. No matter where you live, you won't be happy. So there's no point in seeking for happiness where it can't be found. And this comes from knowing and seeing things as they actually are, which means knowing and seeing that everything is anicca, dukkha, anatta. When you see that things are impermanent, then you don't expect them to be permanent. You don't expect them to be reliable. When you see that things are unsatisfying, then you don't expect them to be satisfying. And when you see that things are impersonal, then you recognize that they have no power over you. You recognize that they don't control you or define you. So they have no power to sting you, to upset you. So then it's very natural then that the mind starts to let go of its fixation with things, its obsession with the things of the world. And the Buddha then says, Nibbinasa bhikkhave chetanaya karaniyang virajamiti. Dhammata esa bhikkhave yang nibbino virajati. So he says, for one who is disenchanted, there's no need to form the wish, may I become dispassionate. But rather it's natural. When you're disenchanted, then you become dispassionate. So this is similar to the line which we see in many suttas, Nibbindang virajati. Viraga vimuchati. So when one is disenchanted, then one becomes dispassionate. Nibbindang virajati. When one is dispassionate, then one attains liberation. Viraga vimuchati. So here we see this as well. The Buddha is saying when you have disenchantment, so when you've seen that all things in the world are unstable, unreliable, impersonal, unsatisfying, then you start to lose your passion for them. You lose your obsession with them. It's just like, what's the point? It's all plastic. It's all fake. It's all junk. It's just trash. Like there's not really anything here that's worth getting caught up in. So you lose your fixation, you lose your lust for things, you lose your passion for things. And when the mind is dispassionate, the Buddha says, this is the next line, Viratasana chetanaya karaniyang vimutinana dasanang sachikaromiti dhammata esa bhikkhave yang virato vimutinana dasanang sachikaroti. He says, when one is dispassionate, one does not need to wish, may I realize the knowledge and vision of liberation. But rather it's natural. For one who is dispassionate to realize the knowledge and vision of liberation. So this means to directly know and see ultimate reality, to directly know and see Nibbana, to be completely and permanently liberated from all defilement and delusion, and to clearly know and see that one has been liberated from all defilement and delusion. So again, these lines match up very neatly with what we see in countless other suttas. Viraga vimuchati. Nibbindang virajati, viraga vimuchati. So disenchantment causes dispassion. Dispassion causes liberation. So then the Buddha summarizes. He says, Itiko bhikkhave viraga vimutinana dasanato vimutinana dasanana sangso. So he says, in this way, dispassion has the goal of knowing and seeing liberation. It has the benefit of knowing and seeing liberation. Nibbida viragata viragane sangsa. Disenchantment has the goal of dispassion, the benefit of dispassion. Yatabhutanyana dasanang nibbidatang nibbidane sangsang. So knowing and seeing things as they are has disenchantment as its goal, disenchantment as its benefit. Samadhi, yatabhutanyana dasanato, yatabhutanyana dasanane sangso. So samadhi, concentration. Samadhi has knowing and seeing things as they are, as its goal and benefit. Sukhang samadatang samadhane sangsang. So pleasure has samadhi as its goal, samadhi as its benefit. So again, we don't cultivate pleasure in our meditation practice just for its own sake, but rather because it helps the mind to become unified and stable. And we cultivate samadhi not for its own sake, but because it helps us develop wisdom, to know and see things as they are. So just understanding that, again, there's a purpose here. Sometimes people object to deliberately cultivating pleasure during meditation. But actually it's because there's a higher purpose. It's a stepping stone along the way. It's kind of like if you go to your kitchen to chop some vegetables and the knife is really dull. Well, the first thing you do is you start sharpening the knife. And somebody comes in the kitchen and is like, what are you doing sharpening that knife? You're not going to get any food just because you have a sharp knife. It's like, well, that's true. Sharpening a knife does not take away your hunger. That's true. But if you have a sharp knife, then you can prepare the food, and then you can eat the food, and then you'll no longer be hungry. So in the same way, it's like, well, if you just cultivate pleasure and meditation, you're not going to attain awakening. It's like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. But through cultivating pleasure in one's meditation, one can develop samadhi, which is a necessary precondition for wisdom, which does result in liberation. So similarly, tranquility has pleasure as its goal and benefit. Euphoria has tranquility as its goal and benefit. Happiness has euphoria as its goal and benefit. Freedom from regret has happiness as its goal and benefit. And finally, he says, kusalani silani, so wholesome virtue, a wholesome morality, has non-regret as its goal and benefit. And he says, iti ko bhikkhave dhamma dhamme abhisandenti, dhamma dhamme paripurenti, apara parangamanayati. So he says, thus in this way, one dhamma flows to the next one. So like each one of these teachings, each one of these developments of mind naturally flows to the next one. Dhamma dhamme paripurenti. Each dhamma naturally helps to fulfill the next one, naturally helps to fill up the next one. And this actually is similar to another sutta where the Buddha uses a similar progression, but he talks about it as how like streams flow together to fill up bigger rivers, and those flow together to fill up pools and lakes, and those all flow together to fill up the ocean. So in the same way, like each one of these qualities flows to help fill up the next one, to make the next one stronger and fuller and richer and deeper. And he says, apara parangamanayati. So, and it helps one to transcend. So one who has not gone beyond, it helps them to go beyond. One who has not transcended, it helps them to transcend. So, by the way, the word para is often translated as the far shore, like the far shore of a river. But actually the word para just means beyond. It doesn't necessarily mean the opposite shore of a river. Though that is a metaphor the Buddha often uses. It's not actually built into this word. Para just means beyond or the other side. So that's the end of the sutta. So we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I can take any questions that you might have. So hello, first of all, to all the people joining in online. So hello to John, Vivian, Gita, Michael, Niranjan, Morgana, Melissa, Elaine, Angela, Bhante Sankicha. Hello, Bhante. Good to see you. Jayanta, Ashok, Shwemang, Maya, Sud, Raman, Mark, Juliana, Sam, Ronald, Deepthi. Welcome to all of you. Good to see you all joining in. However, I don't see any questions online. Are there any questions from the monastery residents? You have a question. Go ahead.
But I was wondering about the role of renunciation. With it, it seems like that naturally develops with dispassion and discontentment. And I was just wondering your thoughts on that. If you see that as one becomes discontent, and renunciation seems automatic almost. You don't want that. You see things as they really are. When you see that it's impermanent, it feels like for myself, you naturally turn away. There's a natural turning away from it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely renunciation is a natural effect of disenchantment and dispassion, which is why in the suttas, whenever someone who's not ordained attains awakening, they immediately seek out monastic life, because it's just natural.
Yeah.
The mind of awakening is the mind of renunciation. So monastic life is, I mean, it's the only thing which makes sense once the mind is developed to that point. So Yeah, definitely. Renunciation is a natural effect of disenchantment and dispassion.
Mm.
But deliberately practicing renunciation also helps to cultivate disenchantment and dispassion.
Mm.
Because when we put things down and we live a simpler life, a life which doesn't involve constantly obsessing about things, then we start to get a sense of the pleasure and happiness which can be possible without fixation on things. So this was something which I felt especially strongly during the recent Turong in Italy. I had so few things and no stability, and yet I was so happy. It was delightful. Like I just had a handful of things that I was carrying on my back as we walked from place to place, and it was just delightful. And so there's this real sense of like, yeah, actually, the more you let go, the happier you are. So in the beginning, that's not always easy to see because our mind is clouded by like, oh, well, I have this thing that I really like and this thing, which I really need that thing. And oh, this is really important too. And I love all of these other things. And I have to have this and this and this. And our mind is kind of clouded by this blurry mass of obsessions. But then you start like deliberately clearing all of that away and you realize, actually, I'm really happy without all of those things. I don't need all of those things to make me happy. And in fact, without those things, my mind is much more settled and peaceful. So then you start to see the purpose and benefit of disenchantment. You start to see that disenchantment is itself a very sublime form of happiness. And this is important because often if you just say to someone words like disenchantment and dispassion, they're like, sounds kind of gross, a little bit boring and depressing. But actually the feeling of it is this sublime, peaceful happiness of like, so much better. I remember when I was my first couple years of high school, I remember I had this huge backpack full of books. I remember weighing it at one point and it was over 20 pounds. I was carrying around 20 pounds of books from class to class. And then I'd get to one class and I would take off the backpack and it's like, finally. And so my third year, I just stopped using a backpack and life got much easier. But I still remember that feeling of like walking around for hours with this huge heavy backpack and then, so much nicer. So that's the feeling of practicing renunciation is you start to drop the weight off of your shoulders and you're like, oh, wow. And then you think about putting it back on and you're like, maybe not, maybe not. And you look around at the other people in the world and they all have this like giant mountain of junk on their shoulders that they're hauling everywhere. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to be like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it looks like Sunya is typed the first half of a question. So we'll see if they type in the second half of the question. In the meantime, is there anything else from here? No? Okay, it's actually, it isn't a question from online, it's just a comment. Okay, good enough for one morning? Okay, so we can end the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Actually, we have a question from Sud. This is actually not quite on topic, but I'll answer it anyway because it's somewhat on topic. Sud says, do we need to take refuge in the triple gem or just follow the Dhamma and reach enlightenment? These are not 2 separate things. They're the same thing. If you take refuge in the triple gem, then that means you're going to follow the Dhamma because that's what taking refuge means. And if you're following the Dhamma, then that means you're going to take refuge in the triple gem because that's what following the Dhamma means. So these are not an either or thing. They're actually the same thing. Anyway, we'll go ahead and end at this time. So please join in again this evening for our usual evening Dhamma program at 7:30. And then again tomorrow, 8 a.m., 7:30 p.m. And feel free to come for our weekend programs. So Saturday at 6 p.m., meditation and Dhamma talk, and then Sunday all day, so 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. You can come to the monastery and join in with our Dhamma programs. So we'll see you all next time.